Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 9, Episode 7. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Our special guest on this episode is Anna Martini, CEO of Psycho Bunny, a buzzy specialty brand popping up, or should I say hopping up.
Ooh.
See what I did there? Everywhere in A malls around the world. I met and worked with Anna in her role as CEO of Group Dynamite. She's based in Montreal. And it's great to have another amazing Canadian retail leader on the show.
I guess I first noticed their stores in the North Park Mall near me. I don't know how long ago that was, and I was, what the heck is this about? Because obviously the name and the branding is kind of in your face, which we talk about a little bit. But and I guess I didn't fully appreciate until I did a little bit of research how vast really their retail presence is, not only in North America, but around the world.
We're coming to you live from the city with big shoulders, Windy City, Chicago, here in the Bamboozer Podcasting Nook kind of studio, right on the show floor in the all-new Shoptalk Fall. We've had some great interviews already. We've taken in some of the sessions. We've been wandering around the show floor. Any thoughts? We're not quite done, but any thoughts from Shoptalk Fall here in one of your favorite towns, Chicago?
Yeah, it's fun to be in Chicago again. It's been a while since I've been at a conference here. I'm here all the time. As longtime listeners will know, my children live here, and I lived here for many years. But I think as an event, it's been pretty good. You know, people have been to other Shop Talk events. It feels very similar to the Las Vegas event, smaller.
Yeah.
First time around. One of the stats I heard, which I thought was really interesting, is that 75% of the attendees, this is their first time at any Shop Talk event. So from that standpoint, in terms of acquiring possible new folks that will participate in Shop Talk Vegas, Grocery Shop, Shop Talk Europe, whatever it might be. It's pretty exciting. I mean, I guess I'm going to keep my comments pretty concise, partially because we're not quite done. A lot of the topics, I think, would be familiar to most people, talking about retail media, talking about personalization, et cetera, growth strategies, automation, all these kinds of things to drive efficiency. Lots of good representatives from brands talking about those kinds of things. The one, and I know we touched on this, I think, in an earlier episode, there's a whole track around unified commerce, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what unified commerce is and what's different. My cynical side says that it's just mostly a rebranding, so you don't have to say seamless commerce or frictionless commerce or omni-channel or phygital, God forbid.
God forbid.
So, I guess my take on that, and maybe it's something we come back to, I was even thinking about, because it's starting to get such, a buzz, I guess. Maybe even that's a topic for, what is this and what's important. But what I really think is unified commerce is very much this idea of what I call harmonized retail, which is that everything works together and you think about being highly customer-centric. And now I don't think that's a new idea. People have been working on it for a long time. So from that perspective, I don't think it's anything new. I actually think the key thing, and this we'll get to an episode we'll have in a couple of weeks, to me, unified commerce is really pretty foundational. Like, if you cannot have one source of customer data, if you can't figure out how to get your channels to work together, you're falling behind, because a lot of retailers have really been working at this.
So you don't see it as a point of arrival. You see it as almost or table stakes versus differentiator.
Yes.
It's pretty much table stakes, right?
But it's very clear that many companies, I kind of hate to say that in some respect, because it's very clear, and I work with some of these companies that are not very good at it yet. Now, some of that is they started late. Some of that is they didn't make it a priority. Some of it is that it's very complicated, takes capabilities, quite a lot of money, and for various reasons couldn't invest. And so I don't want to make it sound like everybody's got this figured out and you're an incredible laggard if you're not there yet. But there are plenty of people who have been at this for 10, 15 years and are pretty far advanced. So
good for time on task, right? Just culturally getting used to operating like that, in my experience, is itself a big differentiator.
Sure.
Now, before we get to our interview with Anna, let's dive into this week's most important retail news, brought to you by Scale, the world's fastest-growing enterprise commerce platform. Learn more about their solutions at scale.com. That's SCAYLE.com. It's still October, but everybody's talking about holidays, so lots of holiday forecasts rolling out from NRF to all the consulting groups to CoreSite. What are you hearing, and what are your thoughts?
Well, a couple weeks back, we talked about a few, and we got a few more. I think we're probably about done in terms of the major forecasts. And, part of me, I was like, do we really want to include this? Because, what are you going to do with this information? At this point, holiday is in the books, not a lot to be done. So it's almost more for the retail geeks, just like, what are people saying? And then we'll be able to dissect this after the numbers come in. So really quickly, this all comes against, and this is maybe the wild card here, on the positive side, at least for the U.S., a lot of people, we talked most of last year about whether we were going to have a recession, whether we're going to have a soft landing. Mm-hmm. Now I think the economists are kind of calling it the no landing scenario, which is things are just kind of cruising along pretty good, and, improving interest rates will probably keep things going. And, of course, there's still the potential of a lot of volatility because of what's going on in the Middle East and the U.S. election.
Sure.
I think almost everybody that's put out a forecast has caveated it a little bit of, it's always hard to predict, what's that saying, it's really hard to make predictions, particularly about the future. Yeah. So, but anyway, just to very quickly touch on these. So the NRF, which of course is one of the most important organizations that puts out a forecast, they actually gave a range of, which is kind of wimpy. Come on, but 2.5.
Pick a spot. Pick a spot.
3.5%. Now their forecast, and this is the other thing you got to pay attention to, is what is the period that they call the holiday.
Right.
They call the holiday November and December. So 2.5 to 3.5. Consumer Growth Partners, a major consulting firm, focuses a lot on retail and CPG. They had actually put out a forecast several weeks ago that was lower. They decided to up their forecast to 4%, so they're a bit more optimistic than most. But CoreSite, our friends at CoreSite, Deb Weinswig and team, their forecast period is October, November, and December, so a little bit different. I don't know that.
So that
has a huge
captures.
bearing.
I guess it captures Prime Day, for example.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
So those promotional days would be in there, which might explain a little bit why it's on the high side. But they're at 4% too. So now that we've had a look at these, for the most part, 2.5 to 4%.
Yep.
Which is not, if you knew nothing, that would probably be the range you would come up with, because historically. That's about what we see. So unless it's a big recession year, you don't see a lot of variation. The number pretty much starts with the 3, maybe inches into the 4. If it's a tough year, it starts with a 2. So, maybe not a lot of real news value in these. But, let's get that out of the way and move on to stuff that's a little bit more exciting, perhaps.
Well, let's talk about store openings and closings, which has kind of been an ongoing thread of discussion throughout the podcast, really, since its inception. Some big players making some big cuts. And, of course, we'll get to the opening part, but what are you hearing?
Well, the thing I'm wondering about, and I actually almost included something like this in my predictions this year, because I do, my sense is that we may start to see store closings exceed store openings. And the reason I think that is largely that some of the real big store openers are slowing their pace, and then there's just a lot of retailers that are overstored and in various degrees of trouble. And so I don't know yet that we can conclude it, but this past week, really, we've had some pretty big announcements. So Walgreens, which I think we talked about a couple months ago, said they were doing this big store review. Well, I don't know that it's completely done, but with their earnings announcement, they shared that they're going to close 1,200 stores, which I think is about 17% of the total store count over the next 3 years, 500 next year. CVS has been closing stores. Rite Aid has been closing stores. So if you look at North American pharmacies...
The pharmacy is the dollar store sector of 2024, right? 2023 was all the dollar stores. Now it seems the pharma guys.
Yeah, so, this is a pretty big reset. Now, I think on the one hand, I think two things are going on. One is there seems to have been an arms race, so to speak, or a land grab kind of mentality with the major chains just opening stores like crazy over the past decade. Yeah. So I think they overshot the runway just in general.
Well, and they had a good tailwind with COVID. Everybody's looking for the shots.
Right. And then you had, sort of masked maybe some of the underlying issues. But, now we're seeing obviously online competition or, at least for prescriptions. A lot of the categories that are in drugstores, to me, there's almost, and I don't want to go too deep down a rabbit hole here, but there's a lot of characteristics, I think, of pharmacies, the CVS, Boots, Walgreens type pharmacy, that almost remind me of department stores in that they served a really good purpose back in the day because they brought a lot of different items in a convenience format in addition to obviously prescriptions and the more healthcare-centric stuff. But now when you go to a typical CVS or Walgreens, it's a little bit of a convenience store because it's got, Diet Pepsi and sandwiches and frozen Pepsi, right? Coffee, etc. It's got they've historically had a lot of beauty products, but and we'll talk about Ulta in a second, but as Ulta and Sephora and others have expanded, there's so many of those locations close by. Plus there's just a ton of, 7-Eleven, Wawa, etc. So I think the competition, not to mention, the discount mass merchant guys have been opening a lot of stores.
Well, I was
they got their own pharmacies.
Between Walmart, Target, and Costco, I mean, there's a lot of reason to just get your drugs and prescriptions there. Right.
So I just think the competitive environment, both physically and online, has become so intense. And then the weird mix of stuff they have.
Eclectic, I think.
It's not that compelling. Like, how many people will really have like a coffee emergency or an eyeliner emergency or something like that? So I think it's not surprising to me that they're pulling back a lot on stores. I think the next question is going to be format reinvention because they were pushing more on kind of getting into services that hasn't really panned out.
Yeah.
So now the question is going to be, well, what do you do with that space? Because they've got to have a lot of unproductive space just within any given location. Now, closing stores because so many CVSs in particular are close to each other. I imagine, they'll close some stores. They'll get a little bit of a bump picking up some of that business.
As long as they hold on to the scripts, right? And that's the key in closing pharmacies is transferring those prescriptions because that's the magnet.
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. So, and then, somewhat related, we've talked about 7-Eleven a couple of times. They're closing 400 stores in North America. Here's, I think, another case of where just so many store openings and so much competition that they're kind of right-sizing things. So this all comes against the backdrop of, Big Lots, a bunch of other companies just in the last few months have announced, pretty big store closings. Yeah. So it may be a bit of a fluke that it's so concentrated in a couple-month period, but you kind of wonder whether, new leadership is coming in or just, financial pressures are forcing people to do things. But, the other hand...
On the upside
is, we still have plenty of companies opening stores. One of the more aggressive announcements, particularly from a comparatively mature retailers from Ulta. And Ulta, which actually didn't have the greatest quarter, but they obviously have a lot of confidence in their business model. They're already at, I believe, 1,400 stores in North America or in U.S. They're going to open another 400 stores. So that's
is that all in the U.S.? Because I know they're also looking at Mexico.
I believe
right?
they have not. I believe that's all U.S. Yes, they are looking at Mexico and maybe Canada. I know we talked about that with Dave Kimball when he was on the pod.
Yeah.
And the other little quick thing I would just want to mention about Ulta, kind of in the context of all the discussion we've had about department stores and how important the beauty business historically has been to department stores. So if Ulta gets to 1,800 stores, that'll be basically 5x the number of stores that Macy's is aiming to have. So you think about, just from a convenience standpoint, how much more effort you have to put into to make the trek to Macy's. Now, Macy's has some brands that Ulta doesn't, and you may be, shopping for other things. So
there'll be some channel management going on. But you've also got the Kohl's. You walk into Sephora's and the Kohl's. I mean, it's a big convenience play. It's a dynamic landscape.
Sure. Yeah. So, what is it going to take, particularly as Macy's and others are trying to really, reboot themselves to steal away that business that has migrated to the Ultas, the Sephoras, and others?
Let's talk about LVMH's results because they're kind of a bellwether. I mean, some of their brands, their houses are more than approachable luxury. They're luxury.
Sure.
And they put out some pretty soft numbers, which I don't know if it's taking people by surprise, but it tells us a few things about international business. But what does it tell us overall about the category?
To the degree you want to pay attention to what the stock market thought, it freaked out the stock market in a pretty big way because their stock took a big hit, as did many other luxury-related brands. So the particular thing was they reported a 4.4% sales drop, and that was a surprise. I mean, I think people expected to be at a relatively weak quarter, but not this bad. And a couple of different things going on, again, which we've talked about with a bunch of brands. China, for just about everybody, is extremely weak.
Yep.
It was particularly weak for LVMH. Japan also was a bit of a surprise that was weaker than a lot of people thought.
They called that a bit of an exchange issue more than a volume issue.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. But if you look at North America, Europe, kind of rest of the world, overall pretty flat. Now, a few of their brands did quite well. The Louis Vuitton brand, or house, I should say, to use their nomenclature. Dior was relatively strong. I'm going to pronounce this correctly, Loewe, which almost everybody I've ever met who's not in the industry or knows that it's a Spanish brand, not a French brand. Loewe did well. But everything else was pretty weak. Now, we've talked about this multiple times. We've seen kind of a string of weak results from, not only the luxury department stores, but many of the other conglomerates, Tapestry, Capri, Keurig, etc. So really, when you look at luxury, pretty much it's only Hermes and Prada that have been putting up pretty good numbers. So, I think some of this makes sense in the context of the kind of discretionary recession sort of idea. I actually think it's, and China. But if you take kind of China out of the equation, I think one of the big issues, which doesn't get a lot of discussion, is the increase in average unit retail. And this was something that we struggled with at Neiman Marcus. It's kind of luxury's dirty little secret that so many brands have driven the top line in their more mature markets through taking prices up. And, when you take those moves as a pricing strategy, combined with inflation, combined with people maybe struggling, it's a tough recipe to drive the top line. But I think a lot of luxury players have found when they take prices down, there's not a lot of increase in volume,
right?
Because you're operating in such rarefied air,
right?
So
whether you want a $3,000 handbag or a $2,900 handbag.
Right. So I think it's actually a bit of a systemic issue in terms of the way the business, the very high end, has focused on very few customers. But they still need the occasional not rich person to buy a handbag or buy
aspirational customer.
Right.
Whatever,
so it's a bit of a dilemma. So I actually think that is one of the things that's not, and I can't give you, this is a little bit some data and some experience, but I haven't seen good data to say this. I have talked to several people that are luxury analysts that say, they believe that's absolutely an issue. So I don't know how you get out of the malaise. Certainly if the economy gets a little bit better, inflation's not a big deal. But, the stock market is at record high. So there's a lot of things that
you need the international business to pick up somehow, some way, right?
Right. But how you drive North America and Western Europe, I think, is a real question.
All right. Well, that's the news. Thanks again to our presenting news sponsor, Scale. And now let's get to our interview with Anna Martini.
Anna, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Where do we find you today?
Hello, Steve. I am in Montreal.
One of my favorite cities. Lovely to visit, but of course, lovely to visit with you and get you on the podcast and hear about all the exciting things going on at Psycho Bunny. But before we get to that, we generally like to kick things off just to learn a little bit more about our guests. So maybe you could take 30 seconds or so just to tell us a little bit about your journey into retail and what you currently are doing at Psycho Bunny.
Perfect. Well, first of all, Steve, thank you very much for hosting me. Very excited to be here today. So I'm the CEO of Psycho Bunny. I've been with Psycho Bunny for almost 2 years now. So very, very exciting, high growth, amazing business that's going to, very soon take over the world. Just a little bit about my background. I've spent a lot of my career in retail. Early on, running retail practices at Deloitte, then left and went actually to the other side, the industry side, and spent about 13 years at Dynamite and Garage. I'm sure many of you know, great operation here in North America. And then I spent about 6 years in sports and entertainment with the Montreal Canadiens group. And now I'm at Psycho Bunny.
Go Habs. Go Habs.
I was going to say, I knew you were going to jump on the Go Habs thing. Well, it's quite an interesting journey. And Psycho Bunny is one of those brands that I've been following for a little while. Of course, I probably it first came on my radar screen because of the interesting brand name, but perhaps we'll get to that in just a minute or two. But for folks that may not know very much about the brand, maybe you could give us a little history
how many stores, that sort of thing, just so people are grounded in some of the facts about the business.
Sure. So Psycho Bunny originated in 2005 in New York. It started off with two entrepreneurs that just started this brand called Psycho Bunny. And if I just fast forward to today, we've got over close to 100 stores in North America, about 60 stores in LATAM, so Mexico, Panama, Colombia. We've got a store in the Middle East and soon having a second one. And we've got some operations in Japan. So our global presence is already pretty remarkable, and we're hoping to continue growing our business.
That's interesting. I had no idea about the global footprint. Can you expand a little bit about the business model? Is it a mix of corporate owned and franchise? How does that work?
Yes, it is a combination. We've got our North American platform are all corporate owned and operated stores. And then we've got partners operating our stores in LATAM and in the Middle East and in Japan.
Fantastic. It's nice to hear your voice again, by the way. You and I worked together quite a bit at Retail Council, and we've been in touch ever since.
We did.
So thanks again. Thanks again for joining us. Let's talk about that branding bit about, it's one thing to come up with this name, the Psycho Bunny name, as you said, founded in New York, but talk about how you take a name like that and make it and bring it to life. I mean, how do you bring something like it has expectations in my mind that it's going to be kind of an alt brand, but expand on how you and the team think about that.
Well, if you look at the logo, it's a bit self-explanatory, just in terms of our bunny and our crossbones. So that kind of is a pretty good descriptor for a Psycho Bunny. But we look at this as a very bold statement. So the bold standard is kind of our new ethos and our whole brand positioning. And I think this, the bunny is pretty powerful in all of its applications, whether it's at a storefront, whether it's sitting on, an embroidery on a polo, or as a detail on the inside of a product. We think about this bunny all day long, and everything we do is really about the bunny.
I was in you. We don't hear that a lot on the podcast.
I know, right? Maybe I'm going to redo my life and make it all about the bunny.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, I was in your store at Hudson Yards a while ago, and the people were really fun. And I wonder if that's, that is you translating the Psycho Bunny brand into customer experience. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, first of all, just in terms of how we present ourselves to our guests, our customers, is we're a pretty bold and positive brand, and with that comes you want it to be a brand that's fun and that's noticeable. I think that's pretty important. Anybody that walks around with any kind of bunny on them, it's because they're it gives them a lot of confidence to walk around with a bunny. So I think that's pretty important. And in terms of our whole store experience, we celebrate the bunny. We run a bunch of contests with our store staff. We celebrate big bunny sales. We do a lot of stuff just around, the positive side of Psycho Bunny.
That's fun. Now, I also know you as a real product person. Now, the product is, you talk about Peruvian Pima cotton. Talk about how important the sourcing is to you and the brand. I think it's from Peru, and how does it align to your quality, sustainability that comes with a cost and comes with an expectation? Talk about how you intersect those two.
Well, our Psycho Bunny product really is premium product. So that is very, very, very important. And it's a non-negotiable one. So it's not about, trying to source this stuff cheaper and all this kind of stuff. It's really about creating premium product for our guy and for the young kids that we are addressing. So this is a very, very critical offering in terms of our brand. And so, like I said, it's not something that's very negotiable. And Peruvian Pima cotton is superior quality cotton. So we work with, quite a few factories in Peru, amazing people, amazing businesses there that also care, about the quality of the product. So that's really, really important for us.
So maybe just kind of, I was going to say pulling on the thread there, but that seems like a bad choice of words for apparel. But obviously the apparel, the fashion world is quite competitive. We've talked about on the podcast and just generally in the industry that maybe we're in a bit of this discretionary recession where it's just harder and harder maybe to drive the top line with the backdrop of the pressure that consumers are feeling. New competition, whether it's folks like Zara that are expanding, the China direct models. I mean, there's just so much competition, largely on the value side. What sort of pressures does that put on you, either from the way you think about pricing, or in particular, just going back to where Michael was talking about the cost of maintaining a high quality, sustainable product?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think people will pay for quality for sure. And so the challenge for us is like, how do we tell the quality story? So when you hear Psycho Bunny, like, one is an attractive name, people are curious about it. So what we're really focusing on now, how do we tell a better story in terms of when you buy Psycho Bunny product, you are buying premium product. Like, it looks better, it lasts longer, the color's more beautiful, like all of the details, whether it's like the stitching, whether it's the button, just everything about, how every kind of single touch point around the product. So it's really about telling that story. And that's what differentiates us. And, our competitors all have their own story, and that's great. So I think it's more about what the customer is going to be attracted to. We just got to make sure our story is pretty clear. Sure.
Well, it's definitely quite provocative. Maybe shift gears a little bit. At the outset, we were talking about how you've already got quite a lot of stores. You're expanding internationally. As you expand, how do you think about translating what you do online or in marketing, I guess more broadly, to what you do in your physical spaces? And I guess just also kind of bringing together that blur of digital and physical to create that really powerful customer experience.
So interestingly, as we open, like in the Middle East, for example, our guy, so we do have a muse. His name is Liam. So you guys know his name is Liam. Liam is 34 years old, and Liam could live in Dubai or lives in Toronto or lives in Miami. So we got Liams all over the world, and Liam is really our focal point. And so as we're building out like our physical stores or building out our digital presence, we always have like Liam in mind in terms of who this guy is, what he's doing in life, what are things that are important for him. So that focal point helps us kind of erase a bit of the blur when you're looking at the world, because it could be overwhelming when you're looking at the world.
So let's talk about the brand, and it's a very optimistic brand. I mean, it's been built from the ground up, really created from a notion, and now it's kind of a global brand. So as you compare yourself at your level or your category, how do you differentiate yourself from the competition? I mean, you've already talked a little bit about the product quality for sure. Is it this understanding of what did you call him, a muse, Liam the muse? Talk about how you look in the competitive set and say we're going to be different the following couple of ways. What stands out to you that way?
Well, in terms of our product, we always have a little like edge. There's a little bit of rebellion and a little bit of edge to our product. That's a differentiating factor when you look at our competitors. So that's pretty important as we develop, because we design and develop all our own product, obviously, and source our own product. So as we design the product, we're always we always are very conscious of like making sure that we stick to that as we're dressing Liam in his life. So that you'll see that everywhere in every single touch point, whether it's like the hang tag or whether it's like the embroidery on a t-shirt. So that's a very important differentiating factor. One of the other things that's important for us also is if you look at some of our, call it our marketing strategies, like we partnered with Tennis Canada to be the apparel sponsor for big tennis, obviously tournament, ATP 1000 here in Canada. And just how we show up in these events. One is like we dress everybody, all the officials, all the ball boys, everybody that's kind of customer facing. That's one thing. But also just how we, created our pop-up shops in Montreal and Toronto. like the whole environment we created is a fun environment where, our customers are really connected to like the Psycho Bunny experience. So it becomes like a whole bunch of these things, but they're always really focused on being true to the brand and true to our customer.
So just a quick follow-up question on this brand expression. My understanding, but correct me if I'm wrong, is you are not that reliant on wholesale compared to your direct to consumer. I guess the first question is that accurate at this point, that wholesale is not that big a percentage of your business?
It's 25% of our business. Wholesale is 25% of our business. So, I mean, the retail, because you control the environment a lot more in retail, when we develop product, even from a wholesale perspective, it's the same attention, it's the same liam that we have in our minds, right? Because liams shop everywhere, right?
Sure.
Partners.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I was curious about, and maybe kind of gets a little bit more to your longer term strategy, but as you well know, there's been all this discussion of direct to consumer versus wholesale. Historically, a lot of apparel brands kind of roughly in your positioning have really emphasized department stores, but department stores generally are contracting. So I guess I'm just curious how you think about direct to consumer versus wholesale, and have you tended to rely on more direct to consumer because you like that control of the customer experience, the ability to really express what you're trying to do for the Liams of the world?
Well, it started off as a wholesale brand. So the legacy was it was wholesale like in the US originally, and then we started to expand into our own stores. And our wholesale partners are very important partners for us. And we have some pretty significant wholesale partners in the US. And what we do with them is we try to share with them, like our brand positioning, just in terms of everything from, let's say, marketing collateral, how we display our product in their stores, how we try and create like styling, whether it's on their online platforms or in their stores. So like for us, they are an extension of us. So we look at wholesale as wholesale partners for us, as opposed to just, selling these things to a third party. So that's, I think, is very, very important.
I was gonna ask you about your stores and how you think about them. I was speaking to another retailer, and they were talking about, or the question was, why open stores, and is it four-wall profitability? But they were also saying that when they open the stores, and this was my case, that when I first came across your brand at Hudson Yards, I'd never heard of it. It wrote, suddenly now I knew about the brand. How do you think about the stores that you open? Is there kind of that different modalities about four-wall profitability plus growth in the trading area, plus online, plus wholesale, I guess, driving wholesale as well? How do you think about that and measure the success of your stores?
Well, firstly, like, every single store that we have chosen was obviously from a business process point of view. Like we evaluate the markets. Where do we think that we will be successful? The liams in these areas, like the right shopping centers, like, it's all those typical, call them retail kind of factors. We are in many premium malls in the U.S. where even our wholesale partners have Psycho Bunny presence, and it's quite complementary to be in malls where we could be in our Dillard's and we could have our own standalone store. So they're not necessarily competing, because sometimes not even the same customer that's shopping Dillard's versus shopping our store. But our store is think about it, it's a complete immersion into the brand experience is what a store does for us. So it's very, very important in terms of our strategy, for sure.
Yeah, actually, I've got that experience here in Dallas, because I've been to your North Park store, and then Dillard's just 3 minutes down the mall. So yeah, I absolutely get that. So one of the things we've been doing this year, in particular, in addition to talking about how brands grow and how you differentiate yourself and all those good kinds of things, is to dig a little bit into leadership styles, and particularly given you've had a couple of different lives, different kinds of responsibilities in your career, how would you say your leadership style has changed and evolved? And when you think about how you need to adapt to the changing pace of disruption, what have you learned? Might you want to share with the audience about some of your learnings?
Well, I think to be successful, I think in retail today, as a leader, I think you really have to be open. Like, you have to be open to embrace change and, like, call it disruption for lack of a better word. And I think you really have to be open to learning from, members of your team who are going to, go down very specialized type of areas, whether it's like, how will AI influence retail in the future? Like what is the best combination of managing, like, digital media spend? Like we have expertise in the building who are way better than I am on those very specialized areas. And what I've learned from a leadership perspective is forget about me teaching them. I think they're teaching me. So I think having a very open mind in terms of adapting to the fast pace of what's going on in retail and everything that's influencing retail, I think is really, really important for a successful brand.
Are there things you feel like one of the things I explored in the book that I put out this year was this concept, maybe you're familiar from Adam Grant, about rethinking approaches to problems, or actually unlearning that there are things that perhaps we as leaders have relied upon in our history that have served us well in the past, but may not actually serve us well in the future, or might get in the way of our being successful. Have you had any experience like that? Does that concept resonate with you?
Well, I think there's the concept of like sometimes you go to history and say, okay, history will dictate like how we fix things, and sometimes there is no history. So that's where it's a little bit tougher. You can't go backwards. You can only go forward. So you got to think a little bit differently.
Well, that's a great jumping off point to the kind of the last questions is what's next for Psycho Bunny? Is it a more wholesale, different blend of wholesale? Is it more international expansion? What's in the
I think
path?
wholesale is going to be important for us for our foray into Europe. Before opening standalone stores, I think going down the wholesale channel, I think, could be important for us of how we, show up at Selfridges or Printemps or Galerie Lafayette or Rinascente in Italy. I think that could be very, very important. Also, line extensions, I think, is something that we continue to look at. Are we going to do some collaborations and this kind of stuff? So we're looking at a whole bunch of these different options and alternatives.
Interesting. And is there a counterpart to Liam in the future? Are you considering women's, or are you solidly a Liam brand? How do you guys think about that?
Well, right now, women's, we do a small little capsule at holiday period, which is more like the family package. And so we are not, right now, it's not in the immediate plan to foray into women's. You never know, at some point it will.
Sure.
But, that entails a whole structure to start doing women's. So at this point, we're trying to stay focused on men's and kids and continue our global expansion.
And I'm wondering, as you think about expansion, whether it is the line extensions or geographic or whatever it might be, are there certain brands that you look at that you try to learn from, that you say, wow, we'd really like to emulate their kind of success, or we look at them for what they do with the customer experience or what they do with product development or anything like that?
Yeah, well, we look at some of our competitors for like a whole bunch of different things. Sometimes we look at a competitor and say, like, what is the experience in store? And just like, it's just a whole wow in-store experience. We look at some competitors to say, my God, these guys are so good at, in terms of like product development and so on. And then you have some competitors that are just really good at everything that's digital and marketing, how they're using like loyalty programs and CRM. So it's a kind of a combination of a whole bunch. So we look at a whole bunch of people. And we look at some of the luxury guys just because at the end of the day, like, if you think of like we're call it affordable luxury, like very affordable luxury. But when you look at luxury and what they do so well in terms from a customer experience, from a product perspective. So it's a whole combination of this stuff.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I've learned a lot actually in the conversation. This, when Steve and I were talking about, as we often do, who we'd love to have on the pod, one of the kind of threads that we have is, so to speak, is a special, not big, not mega big, but really special. We had Viore on, for example, in the early days. We kind of think of Psycho Bunny in the same way. So we really appreciate you joining us on the mic here at the Remarkable Retail Podcast and sharing some insights into Psycho Bunny and what's forward. It's such a fun brand, and congratulations on all the success so far. And of course, we wish you much continued success. And thanks again for joining us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys.
Thanks for tuning in. New episodes of Season 9 will be available each and every Tuesday, so be sure and tell your friends and colleagues in the retail industry all about us. If you liked our episode, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts.
And I'm Steve Dennis, strategic advisor, keynote speaker, and best-selling author of 2 books, Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, and Remarkable Retail, How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me, my consulting, and keynote speaking at stephenpdennis.com.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant and advisor, keynote speaker, and media entrepreneur. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.